The stars looked different when you knew death was coming for them. Admiral Zephyr stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the tactical display show another red dot disappear. That was the Calarian home system, gone in 3 days. The Vorthak Empire had taken it just like they took everything else. Fast, brutal, and complete. 300 years of war had taught the Galactic Defense Council many things. They learned that the Vorthak never retreated. They learned that surrender meant slavery or death. They learned that these bug-like creatures fought with perfect coordination, like parts of one giant mind. Most importantly, they learned they were losing. The council chambers on Centauri Prime buzzed with nervous energy. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat around the circular table, their different forms of alien life united only by fear. The holographic display in the center showed the galaxy map, and the spreading red zones told a story no one wanted to hear. 17 systems in the last month, said Counselor Thex, his blue skin turning pale. At this rate, we have maybe 5 years before they reach the core worlds. Our fleets can't match their numbers, added Representative Cora from the Andromedan colonies. Every battle costs us ships we can't replace fast enough. Admiral Zephyr cleared his throat. All eyes turned to him. He was old for a Centaurian, his silver hair marking decades of service. There is one option we haven't considered, he said slowly. The humans. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew about Earth. The small blue planet in the Sol system had been under quarantine for 50 years. The humans were too violent, too unpredictable. Their first contact with galactic civilization had ended badly when they tried to claim territorial rights to 3 star systems and threatened war when denied. The humans are savages, said Counselor Vex. They fight each other constantly. They can't even unite their own planet. Exactly, Zephyr replied. They've spent thousands of years perfecting the art of war. Every other species in the galaxy achieved peace before reaching the stars. Humans brought their wars with them. The debate went on for hours. Some argued that bringing humans into the conflict would be like setting fire to stop a flood. Others pointed out that conventional tactics had failed against the Vorthak for 3 centuries. Finally, desperation won. The vote was close, but it passed. Admiral Zephyr would go to Earth. The journey to Sol took 2 weeks. Zephyr had time to read the classified files on human military history. What he found both fascinated and horrified him. These creatures had weaponized everything from disease to weather. They invented concepts like psychological warfare and guerrilla tactics. They wrote books about winning wars without fighting battles. Earth's orbital station called Liberty looked like what humans built. Functional, heavily armed, and slightly threatening even when trying to be diplomatic. Captain Jake Morrison met Zephyr at the airlock. The human was tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Admiral, Morrison said, extending his hand in the human greeting. Welcome to Earth space. The briefing room was simple and clean. Morrison sat across from Zephyr, flanked by other humans. Colonel Lisa Hayes had short blonde hair and the bearing of someone used to command. Major Ryan Clark looked younger but carried himself with confidence. Dr. Alex Turner seemed different from the others, less military, more scholarly. We need soldiers, Zephyr began, activating the holographic display. The galaxy map appeared between them, red zones marking Vorthak territory. Your species has a reputation for warfare that even we find concerning. But we're out of options. Morrison studied the display. Tell me about them. The Vorthak are insectoids, roughly humanoid but with chitinous armor and 4 arms. They think collectively. Individual Vorthak are just parts of a larger hive mind. They coordinate perfectly in battle, never make mistakes, never hesitate. Weaknesses? Colonel Hayes asked. None we've found. They adapt quickly to our tactics. Their technology matches ours. Their numbers seem endless. Dr. Turner leaned forward. You said they think collectively. How does that work exactly? Zephyr explained what the Council knew about Vorthak communication. Bioelectric signals that let them share thoughts instantly across vast distances. Individual Vorthak rarely acted independently. Interesting, Turner said, making notes. Morrison sat back in his chair. What's in it for us? Technology sharing, full council membership, and territorial rights to any worlds you help liberate. The humans exchanged glances. There was something in their expressions that made Zephyr uncomfortable, like predators recognizing prey. We'll need 2 months to prepare, Morrison said. Send us everything you have on Vorthak tactics, biology, and technology. Combat footage, prisoner interrogations, technical specifications, everything. Of course, Zephyr agreed. How many troops can you provide? That depends on what kind of war you want to fight, Morrison replied. You've been fighting them like they're just another enemy fleet. But they're not. They're a hive mind, which means they have specific vulnerabilities. What do you mean? Hayes smiled, and Zephyr found it unsettling. Admiral, every human conflict has taught us something new about warfare. We've learned to fight enemies with better technology, superior numbers, and perfect coordination. The Vorthak might be all three, but they're still just another enemy. You sound confident for a species that's never fought an interstellar war, Zephyr said. We've been fighting interstellar wars since before we had spaceships, Clark replied. We just called them world wars back then. 2 days later, Zephyr departed Earth with detailed technical specifications and a promise that human forces would arrive at the front lines within 8 weeks. As his ship jumped to hyperspace, he wondered if the Council had made the right choice. He didn't know that in underground facilities across Earth, military planners were already working on something the galaxy had never seen. They weren't preparing to fight the Vorthak. They were preparing to break them. The humans understood something the Council didn't. Sometimes the best way to win a war wasn't to destroy your enemy's ability to fight. Sometimes it was better to destroy their ability to think. In the depths of a Colorado mountain, Dr. Turner compiled his first reports on Vorthak biology. In a facility outside Moscow, psychological warfare specialists studied footage of hive mind coordination. In classified labs around the world, weapons designers worked on tools that had nothing to do with killing and everything to do with something much worse. The galaxy had asked for soldiers. Earth was preparing to send teachers instead. The lesson they planned to teach would change warfare forever. The underground complex in Colorado buzzed with activity that would have puzzled most military observers. Instead of tanks and artillery, the main floor housed computer terminals, psychology labs, and what looked like a film studio. Colonel Lisa Hayes walked through the facility, reviewing preparations for humanity's first interstellar war. This wasn't how other species prepared for battle. The Centaurians built bigger ships and trained more pilots. The Andromedans focused on shield technology and defensive formations. Earth was doing something entirely different. Status report, Hayes said as she entered the main briefing room. Danny Price stood at attention. The former Navy SEAL had spent 10 years in special operations before retiring to private military work. His weathered face and calm demeanor hid a mind that specialized in unconventional solutions. Ma'am, we've analyzed all the Vorthak data. The aliens were right about one thing. Traditional tactics won't work. Dr. Kate Williams looked up from her computer screen. The behavioral psychologist had spent her career studying group dynamics and collective behavior. Her work on crowd psychology had made her famous in academic circles. Now she was applying those same principles to an alien hive mind. The Vorthak collective consciousness is both their greatest strength and their critical weakness, Williams explained. They coordinate perfectly because individual thought is suppressed. But that same suppression makes them vulnerable to specific types of psychological manipulation. Hayes nodded. Show me. Williams activated the holographic display. It showed a simplified model of Vorthak neural networks. Individual Vorthak brains are actually quite sophisticated, but they're designed to function as nodes in a larger network. When that network experiences conflicting information, the individual nodes can't resolve the contradiction independently. In simple terms, Hayes asked, give them information that doesn't match their shared reality and they can't process it properly. Their brains literally can't handle cognitive dissonance the way individual minds can. Major Ryan Clark entered the room carrying a tablet. The young officer had risen quickly through the ranks due to his innovative thinking and technical expertise. The weapons development teams have some interesting prototypes. He led them to another section of the facility, where technicians worked on devices that looked nothing like traditional weapons. Ben Foster, a civilian contractor who specialized in computer systems, demonstrated the first prototype. This is a neural disruptor, Foster explained, holding up a device the size of a briefcase. It doesn't hurt anyone physically. Instead, it broadcasts signals that interfere with bioelectric communication between Vorthak individuals. Like jamming their radio? Hayes asked. More like giving their entire hive mind a splitting headache, Foster replied. The signals create feedback loops in their neural networks. Imagine trying to think clearly while someone screams directly into your brain. Another technician showed them chemical compounds designed to affect Vorthak metabolism. These don't kill them, she explained. They alter brain chemistry to induce paranoia, confusion, and anxiety. A paranoid Vorthak stops trusting the hive mind's inputs. Hayes examined the various prototypes, sonic weapons that created frequencies painful to insectoid hearing, holographic projectors that could create false visual information, computer viruses designed to corrupt their communication networks. None of it was designed to destroy. All of it was meant to confuse, disorient, and break down the collective thinking that made the Vorthak so effective. What about personnel? Hayes asked. Price pulled up personnel files on his tablet. We're not using regular military units. Instead, we've recruited specialists in psychological operations, intelligence work, and what the Pentagon calls creative problem solving. The files showed an unusual collection of soldiers, former Special Forces operators who specialized in behind-enemy lines work, intelligence officers trained in disinformation campaigns, even reformed criminals whose particular skills made them valuable for unconventional warfare. Elena Rodriguez had led covert operations in 3 different conflicts before joining the Interstellar Project. Her expertise in guerrilla warfare and sabotage made her perfect for the kind of missions Earth was planning. Mike Turner had spent 15 years as a demolitions expert, but his real talent was psychological warfare. He understood how to create fear and confusion in enemy ranks without firing a shot. Julie Adams was a communications specialist who had previously worked for intelligence agencies. Her job was electronic warfare and information manipulation on a scale never attempted before. Dr. Sam Peterson rounded out the psychological warfare team. The former military psychiatrist had studied the effects of stress and confusion on combat effectiveness. His job was to design psychological attacks that would break enemy morale completely. These people will work in small teams, Price explained. No massive formations or direct confrontations. They'll infiltrate occupied worlds, establish hidden bases, and conduct operations designed to make the Vorthak doubt their own senses. Williams brought up another display showing mission profiles. Team A will focus on communication disruption, corrupting their networks with false information and contradictory orders. Team B handles chemical and biological operations, introducing compounds that affect their mental state. Team C manages technological disruption, using their own systems against them. Hayes studied the plans. Other species would call this approach cowardly or dishonorable. Humans called it efficient. Training status? She asked. Phase 1 complete, Clark reported. All personnel have been briefed on Vorthak biology and behavior. They understand how the hive mind works and how to exploit its weaknesses. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. Practical exercises using our new equipment. The training facility occupied several underground levels. Teams practiced using the neural disruptors, learning to coordinate their effects for maximum impact. They rehearsed infiltration techniques for getting close to Vorthak positions without being detected. Most importantly, they learned to think like their enemy so they could predict how the hive mind would respond to different types of psychological pressure. In one training scenario, Adams worked with a simulated Vorthak communication network. Her job was to introduce false information gradually, making it seem like legitimate intelligence. The goal was to make the hive mind question its own data without realizing it was being manipulated. Turner practiced with the chemical deployment systems, learning to contaminate food and water supplies in ways that would affect Vorthak brain chemistry over time. The effects would be subtle at first: increased anxiety, difficulty concentrating, paranoid thoughts about other hive members. Peterson studied the psychological profiles of captured Vorthak, identifying the specific fears and anxieties that affected their species. His team developed audio-visual materials designed to trigger those fears on a massive scale. The most ambitious project was Williams's masterpiece, a comprehensive psychological attack designed to make an entire Vorthak hive turn against itself. By introducing carefully crafted false memories and paranoid delusions, her team could convince different parts of the hive that other parts were compromised or planning betrayal. Timeline? Hayes asked during the final briefing. 6 weeks until the first teams deploy, Price reported. Admiral Zephyr wants us to start with a small occupied world, something we can use as a proof of concept. Hayes nodded. The galaxy expected Earth to send fleets of warships and armies of soldiers. Instead, they were sending small teams of specialists armed with weapons that most civilized species would never imagine using. Rules of engagement, someone asked. Hayes looked around the room at the assembled team leaders. These people would be fighting a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They wouldn't be trying to destroy the enemy. They would be trying to drive them insane. There are no rules, Hayes said simply. The Vorthak have spent 3 centuries conquering the galaxy using overwhelming force and perfect coordination. We're going to teach them that sometimes the best way to win a war is to convince your enemy that they've already lost their minds. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what they were preparing to do. It wasn't warfare as the galaxy understood it. It was something much more dangerous, a systematic attack on the very concept of sanity itself. In 8 weeks, the first human teams would deploy to their target world. The galaxy would finally see what Earth sent when asked for soldiers. Nexus 7 had once been a peaceful farming world. Rolling green fields stretched to the horizon, broken by small cities and transportation networks that moved agricultural products to orbital stations. The Vorthak had conquered it 6 months ago, turning the fertile valleys into staging areas for their next advance toward the galactic core. Captain Elena Rodriguez crouched in the cargo hold of the stealth transport as it descended through Nexus 7's atmosphere. Around her, 11 other specialists checked their equipment one final time. This was humanity's first test, a small world that the Galactic Defense Council had written off as lost. The transport was invisible to Vorthak sensors. Using technology adapted from human submarine warfare, it landed in a remote valley far from any enemy installations. Within minutes, the team had unloaded their supplies and the transport disappeared back into space. Rodriguez studied the tactical display on her portable computer. Vorthak positions dotted the planet's surface like a spreading infection. 3 major bases, dozens of outposts, and patrol routes that covered most of the inhabited areas. Traditional military doctrine would require orbital bombardment, followed by massive ground assault. The human approach was different. Remember, we're not here to fight them, Rodriguez told her team. We're here to make them fight each other. Sergeant Mike Turner finished assembling his specialized equipment. The demolitions expert had brought devices that would have puzzled conventional military engineers. Instead of explosive charges, his pack contained chemical dispensers, sonic generators, and what looked like elaborate pranks. First target is the Central Food Processing Facility, Turner said, pointing to the tactical display. Intelligence reports show they're using captured human agricultural equipment to process Vorthak nutrition paste. Perfect entry point for our special ingredients. Julie Adams was already working on the electronic warfare component. The communications specialist had spent the journey studying Vorthak network protocols. Her equipment could intercept, analyze, and modify their bioelectric transmissions in real time. Their communication system is more vulnerable than we hoped, Adams reported. Individual Vorthak don't question orders from the collective consciousness. They physically can't. Their brains are wired to accept hive instructions automatically. Dr. Sam Peterson unpacked his psychological warfare materials. The former military psychiatrist had designed a series of audio and visual stimuli, specifically calibrated to cause stress in insectoid nervous systems. His weapons were sounds, lights, and images that could drive an entire species to madness. Phase 1 begins at midnight, Rodriguez announced. Turner's team handles the food supply. Adams works on communication networks. Peterson prepares the psychological attacks. Everyone else provides security and support. The Vorthak Food Processing Center sat in a valley surrounded by former human farms. The facility operated around the clock, converting local crops into the protein-rich paste that fed the occupation force. Turner approached it like a puzzle rather than a military target. Instead of destroying the facility, his team introduced carefully designed additives to the food supply. The chemicals were undetectable to Vorthak senses but had profound effects on their nervous systems. Some compounds induced mild paranoia, making individual Vorthak question whether their neighbors were acting strangely. Others affected memory formation, creating gaps and inconsistencies in their recall of recent events. Beauty of it is, they won't know anything's wrong for days, Turner whispered into his radio as his team finished the operation. By then, the compounds will be distributed throughout their entire food chain. Meanwhile, Adams had infiltrated the planet's communication network from a hidden position near the main relay station. Vorthak technology was sophisticated but predictable. They had never needed to defend against the kind of electronic warfare humans had developed. "I'm in their system," Adams reported. Beginning Information Corruption Protocol. Instead of jamming their communications, Adams began introducing subtle errors and contradictions into the data stream. Orders from the Central Command were modified slightly. Not enough to be obviously wrong, but enough to create confusion when units tried to coordinate their activities. A patrol ordered to Sector 7 might receive directions to Sector 9. Supply requests would be acknowledged, but the wrong materials would be delivered. Status reports would show successful operations that never actually happened. Peterson's team set up their equipment on the hills surrounding the main Vorthak base. The psychological warfare specialist had studied captured footage of Vorthak behavior for months, identifying the specific stimuli that triggered stress responses in their species. Initiating sonic pressure campaign, Peterson announced. The hills around the base began broadcasting sounds just below the threshold of Vorthak hearing. The frequencies were carefully chosen to induce anxiety and disorientation without being consciously perceived. To human ears, the night was silent. To Vorthak nervous systems, the environment had become subtly hostile. The effects began within 72 hours. The food supply contamination affected different Vorthak at different rates, creating inconsistencies in behavior that disrupted their hive coordination. Some individuals became suspicious of their neighbors. Others experienced memory problems that made them unreliable for complex tasks. Rodriguez monitored the situation from her hidden command post. "Status report," she requested. "Communication disruption showing results," Adams reported. "They're starting to question their own intelligence reports. 3 units showed up at the same location this morning because they all received slightly different orders." Turner added his observations. "The food contamination is working better than expected. I'm seeing increased aggression between different Vorthak groups. They're starting to argue about mission priorities." Peterson's psychological warfare was having the most dramatic effect. "The sonic pressure is breaking down their collective decision-making ability," he reported. "Individual Vorthak are experiencing stress responses that interfere with their bioelectric communication. The hive mind is getting static." By the end of the first week, the Vorthak garrison was showing signs of serious dysfunction. Patrol routes were being abandoned because units couldn't agree on their assignments. Supply convoys were delivering equipment to the wrong locations. Most importantly, different hive groups were beginning to mistrust each other. Rodriguez decided it was time for Phase 2. "Peterson, initiate the fear protocol." The psychological warfare specialist activated his most ambitious project. Using holographic projectors, sonic weapons, and carefully timed explosions, Peterson's team began convincing the Vorthak that Nexus 7 itself was fighting back. Rocks seemed to move on their own. Trees appeared to attack passing patrols. The planet's geography seemed to shift randomly, with familiar landmarks appearing in the wrong locations. To the stress-addled Vorthak minds, the world had become actively hostile. The coup de grace came when Adams introduced a computer virus into their central command system. The virus didn't destroy data. Instead, it gradually altered it. Maps showed different terrain features. Personnel records indicated that trusted Vorthak were actually human infiltrators. Battle reports described victories as defeats and defeats as victories. "They're completely lost," Adams reported with satisfaction. "The hive mind can't process contradictory information from multiple sources. They're starting to doubt their own sensory input." The psychological breakdown was total and swift. Within days of the virus deployment, different Vorthak units were treating each other as potential enemies. Some groups abandoned their posts entirely, convinced that the planet was haunted or cursed. Others turned their weapons on fellow Vorthak they believed had been compromised by human influence. Rodriguez watched through her surveillance equipment as the Vorthak base descended into chaos. "Planetary Liberation Command, this is Strike Team Alpha. Mission accomplished." The response from Admiral Zephyr came 12 hours later. "Confirm your status, Captain. Our sensors show the Vorthak garrison is in complete disarray, but we're not detecting any major combat." "That's correct, Admiral. The enemy has been neutralized through non-kinetic means. Nexus 7 is ready for Liberation Fleet arrival." There was a long pause before Zephyr responded. "Captain, what exactly did you do down there?" Rodriguez looked at her team as they packed their equipment. Turner was grinning as he sealed up his chemical dispensers. Adams was downloading the last of the corrupted Vorthak data for analysis. Peterson was making notes about the effectiveness of different psychological pressure techniques. "We gave them a lesson in human warfare, Admiral," Rodriguez replied. "We taught them that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is your own mind." When the Liberation Fleet arrived 3 days later, they found a planet in chaos. The Vorthak garrison had effectively destroyed itself through infighting, paranoia, and mass psychological breakdown. Not a single human shot had been fired. But the enemy was completely defeated. Admiral Zephyr's final report to the Council would struggle to explain what had happened on Nexus 7. The humans had achieved total victory without a single conventional battle. Word of Nexus 7 spread through the galaxy like ripples in still water. The Galactic Defense Council called it a miracle. The Vorthak Empire called it impossible. Both sides struggled to understand how an entire planetary garrison had simply collapsed without any recorded battles. Admiral Zephyr stood in the council chambers facing questions he couldn't answer. The holographic display showed 4 more worlds that had fallen to human forces in the weeks following Nexus 7. Each liberation followed the same pattern: rapid enemy collapse with minimal human casualties and no major combat operations. "Admiral, how do you explain these results?" asked Counselor Thex, his blue skin darker with concern. "Our best military analyst can't understand what the humans are doing." Zephyr studied the tactical reports. Kepler Station had fallen when the Vorthak garrison apparently turned on their own reinforcements. New Geneva's occupying force had evacuated the planet, claiming it was cursed. On Titan's Rest, Vorthak units had simply fled without explanation, abandoning billions of credits worth of equipment. "The human methods are highly irregular," Zephyr admitted. "They appear to be using psychological warfare on a scale we've never seen before." "Psychological warfare?" Counselor Vex leaned forward. "Against a hive mind species? That should be impossible." Meanwhile, on Earth, Colonel Lisa Hayes reviewed the latest intelligence reports from the front lines. The success of the first missions had exceeded all expectations, but they had also revealed something troubling about human capabilities. Captain Morrison entered the briefing room carrying classified files. "We have a problem, Colonel. The Council is getting nervous about our methods." Hayes activated the secure communication system. On the screen, reports flowed in from human teams across the combat zone. Each mission pushed the boundaries of conventional warfare further into uncharted territory. Major Tony Brooks reported from Kepler Station. His team had achieved victory by manipulating the Vorthak identification systems, convincing the garrison that their own reinforcements were actually human infiltrators disguised as Vorthak soldiers. "We used their perfect coordination against them," Brooks explained in his after-action report. "Once we convinced the base commander that the incoming reinforcements were compromised, the hive mind's paranoia did the rest. They opened fire on their own forces." Captain Rachel Stone's mission on New Geneva had been even more ambitious. Her team had used the planet's weather control systems to create atmospheric patterns that matched the frequency of Vorthak stress hormones. "We turned the entire planet into a weapon," Stone reported. "The weather patterns created a resonance effect with their nervous systems. Every time the wind blew or the rain fell, their anxiety levels spiked. Within weeks, they were convinced the planet itself was trying to kill them. But it was Colonel Hayes's personal mission to Titan's Rest that had demonstrated the true evolution of human psychological warfare. Instead of targeting the Vorthak forces directly, she had attacked their understanding of reality itself. Hayes had used a combination of holographic projectors, gravitational manipulators, and synchronized disinformation campaigns to convince the Vorthak that the laws of physics on Titan's Rest had become unreliable. Gravity seemed to change direction randomly. Light behaved in impossible ways. Solid objects appeared and disappeared without explanation. "We didn't fight them," Hayes explained to Morrison. "We convinced them that fighting was pointless because reality itself had become their enemy. The psychological impact had been devastating. Vorthak minds, evolved for logical thinking and perfect coordination, couldn't process an environment where basic physical laws seemed to change randomly. The garrison had evacuated within days, spreading reports throughout the Empire about a world where sanity itself had broken down." Morrison pulled up the intelligence analysis. "The Vorthak are adapting faster than we expected. They're starting to recognize the patterns in our attacks. "Show me," Hayes said. The display showed Vorthak communication intercepts from the past week. Their military commanders were beginning to identify human psychological warfare techniques. More importantly, they were developing countermeasures. They're implementing verification protocols for all orders, Morrison explained. Multiple confirmation requirements, independent sensor sweeps, psychological evaluation of personnel before critical missions. Hayes studied the data. They're learning to doubt their own senses. That's actually good for us. How is that good? They're becoming resistant to our methods, Hayes smiled. It was the expression that had made Admiral Zephyr uncomfortable during their first meeting. Because doubt is exactly what we want them to feel. A Vorthak that questions. Everything is a Vorthak that can't function, effectively as part of a hive mind. The next phase of human operations was already in development. Dr. Kate Williams had designed something she called the trust paradox, a psychological weapon that turned the Vorthak's new defensive measures against them. If they're going to verify everything, we'll give them conflicting verification, Williams explained during the planning session. We'll create situations where their own security protocols produce contradictory results. The implementation was elegant in its simplicity. Human teams began feeding false information into Vorthak verification systems at multiple levels. Orders would be confirmed by some sources and denied by others. Sensor sweeps would show human infiltrators that didn't exist. Psychological evaluations would indicate that trusted personnel were compromised. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Vorthak commanders found themselves unable to trust any information source. Orders were questioned and re-questioned until military operations ground to a halt. Personnel spent more time verifying each other's loyalty than performing their duties. They're paralyzed by their own security measures, reported Captain Elena Rodriguez from her latest mission. Every attempt to verify information creates more uncertainty. The hive mind is eating itself. But the true masterpiece was the operation against the Vorthak's main supply depot at Gamma Centauri. Instead of attacking the facility directly, Major Ryan Clark's team had introduced a virus into the depot's inventory management system. The virus was designed to create minor discrepancies in supply records, nothing dramatic enough to trigger immediate attention, but sufficient to create doubt about the accuracy of all inventory data. Over time, the discrepancies accumulated until the Vorthak couldn't trust any of their logistical information. They have millions of tons of supplies, but they can't distribute them effectively because they don't know what they actually have, Clark reported. The hive mind can't make decisions based on unreliable data, so they're essentially paralyzed. The psychological warfare was evolving beyond individual missions into a comprehensive attack on the Vorthak's ability to function as a civilization. Human teams were systematically undermining every system the Empire relied on: communication, logistics, command structure, and most importantly, their collective decision-making process. Admiral Zephyr received regular briefings from Captain Morrison, but the reports left him increasingly uncomfortable. Captain, these methods go beyond unconventional warfare. You're essentially committing psychological genocide. Morrison's response was calm and matter-of-fact. Admiral, you asked us to stop the Vorthak Empire. We're stopping them. The fact that we're doing it without killing them should be considered merciful. But you're destroying their ability to function as a species. A Vorthak that can't trust the hive mind isn't really Vorthak anymore. Would you prefer we use nuclear weapons? The question hung in the air between them. Zephyr understood the implicit threat. Humanity possessed weapons that could sterilize planets, but they had chosen instead to use methods that left their enemies alive but broken. The final reports from the fourth wave of operations showed the extent of human capabilities. On Rigel Prime, Major Danny Price's team had convinced the Vorthak garrison that time itself was flowing differently in various parts of the planet. The confusion had led to a complete breakdown in coordination as different units experienced events in different sequences. On Altair Station, Dr. Sam Peterson had orchestrated a mass hallucination that made the Vorthak believe their own bodies were betraying them. Individual Vorthak began experiencing phantom sensations that convinced them their nervous systems were being controlled by human technology. The Empire is requesting peace negotiations, Admiral Zephyr informed Morrison during their final briefing. Their leadership wants to discuss terms for ending the conflict. Morrison checked his tactical display. Human forces had liberated 37 worlds in less than 6 months. The Vorthak Empire, which had seemed unstoppable for 3 centuries, was collapsing under the weight of its own paranoia and confusion. Terms are simple, Morrison replied. Complete withdrawal from all occupied council territory, reparations for war damage, and psychological counseling for Vorthak personnel affected by our operations. Zephyr stared at the last condition. Psychological counseling? Admiral, we broke their minds. It's only ethical that we help fix them. As the peace negotiations began, the galaxy struggled to understand what had happened. The Vorthak Empire had been defeated not by superior firepower or better tactics, but by an enemy that fought wars inside their heads. The Vorthak homeworld had never known fear. For 3 centuries it had been the heart of an expanding empire, its hive cities humming with the collective consciousness of billions of insectoid minds working in perfect harmony. Now, as Colonel Lisa Hayes studied the planet from orbit, those same cities were dark and silent. The final phase of humanity's war against the Vorthak Empire would not be fought with weapons or armies. Instead, it would be the largest psychological operation in galactic history, an assault on the very concept of collective consciousness itself. Hayes stood in the command center of the human fleet, surrounded by screens showing intelligence data from across Vorthak space. The Empire was crumbling, but its homeworld remained defiant. 3 billion Vorthak lived on the planet's surface, their minds linked in the most powerful hive consciousness ever recorded. Status report, Hayes requested. Dr. Kate Williams looked up from her analysis station. The behavioral psychologist had spent months studying captured Vorthak neural patterns, mapping the exact mechanisms of their collective consciousness. We've identified the primary coordination nodes, she reported. The homeworld's hive mind operates on 17 distinct frequency ranges, with backup systems that can compensate for up to 60% disruption. Captain Jake Morrison joined them at the tactical display. The Council wants to know our timeline. Admiral Zephyr is getting pressure from member worlds to end this quickly. Hayes understood the pressure. The galaxy had watched humanity systematically dismantle the Vorthak Empire, using methods that made everyone nervous. Other species were beginning to wonder if humans might be more dangerous than the enemy they were supposed to defeat. 2 weeks, Hayes replied. But this operation is different from the others. We're not just targeting military forces. We're going after their entire civilization. The plan that emerged from those 2 weeks of preparation was ambitious beyond anything humanity had attempted before. Instead of attacking Vorthak Prime directly, they would surround the planet and conduct the most comprehensive psychological siege in history. Major Ryan Clark commanded the electronic warfare component from his flagship. His team had developed computer viruses specifically designed to exploit the Vorthak's networked consciousness. We're not trying to destroy their communication system, he explained to his staff. We're trying to make it unreliable. The viruses would introduce subtle errors into the hive mind's information processing. False memories would be created and distributed. Sensory data would be altered in ways that created doubt about reality. Most importantly, different parts of the hive mind would receive conflicting information about the same events. Dr. Sam Peterson prepared the psychological warfare campaign from a converted research vessel. The former military psychiatrist had designed audio and visual stimuli, calibrated to disrupt insectoid neural patterns on a planetary scale. We're going to broadcast signals that interfere with their collective consciousness, he told his team. Not enough to cause physical damage, but sufficient to create persistent anxiety and confusion. Captain Elena Rodriguez led the infiltration teams that would establish hidden bases on the planet's surface. Her mission was to introduce chemical agents into the Vorthak, food and water supplies, compounds, that would gradually alter brain chemistry to make individuals more susceptible to independent thought. The goal isn't to poison them, Rodriguez explained to her team. We want to make them think for themselves. For a hive mind species, individual thought is the most dangerous virus we can introduce. The siege began with subtle electronic warfare. Clark's viruses infiltrated the planetary communication network, not to destroy it but to corrupt it gradually. The hive mind began receiving contradictory information about external threats, economic conditions, and the status of their military forces. Within days, different hive clusters were operating on different versions of reality. Some believed the war was going well. Others thought they were on the verge of defeat. A few received information suggesting that other hive clusters were planning betrayals or coups. Peterson's psychological bombardment operated on frequencies just below conscious perception. The signals created persistent stress without an identifiable source. Vorthak across the planet began experiencing anxiety, depression, and paranoid thoughts for the first time in their evolutionary history. Phase 1 effects confirmed, Peterson reported. Planetary stress indicators are rising steadily. The hive mind is experiencing what humans would call chronic anxiety disorder. Rodriguez's infiltration teams worked to introduce chemical agents into the planet's infrastructure. Unlike the crude contamination used on other worlds, this operation was precise and sophisticated. The compounds were designed to gradually reduce the bioelectric sensitivity that allowed individual Vorthak to connect to the collective consciousness. We're not cutting them off from the hive mind, Rodriguez explained in her reports. We're making the connection unreliable. They'll still hear the collective voice, but it will be fuzzy and inconsistent. The combined effects created a feedback loop that amplified each component of the assault. Stress from the psychological bombardment made the Vorthak more susceptible to the chemical agents. The chemical effects made them more vulnerable to the false information being spread by the electronic warfare campaign. Most importantly, the gradual introduction of individual thought created something the Vorthak had never experienced: internal conflict. For the first time in their species' history, individual Vorthak began questioning the decisions of the collective consciousness. We're seeing unprecedented developments, Williams reported after analyzing the latest intelligence. Individual Vorthak are forming opinions that differ from the hive consensus. Some are even refusing to follow collective directives. The breakdown accelerated as the siege continued. Hive clusters that had functioned as unified entities for millennia began fragmenting into smaller groups with different priorities and beliefs. Some wanted to continue fighting. Others sought peace. A few believed the entire war was an illusion created by human psychological weapons. The tipping point came when the virus campaign achieved its ultimate goal. Different parts of the planetary hive mind began receiving information suggesting that other parts had been compromised by human influence. The collective consciousness, designed to function as a unified entity, began to turn against itself. They're experiencing what we might call a planetary-scale nervous breakdown, Williams observed. The hive mind is fragmenting into thousands of smaller consciousnesses, each convinced that the others can't be trusted. Hayes watched the tactical displays as Vorthak Prime descended into chaos. Cities that had operated in perfect coordination for centuries began working at cross purposes. Agricultural regions stopped sending food to urban centers because they believed the cities had been infiltrated by humans. Manufacturing facilities produced conflicting products because different hive clusters had different priorities. Admiral Zephyr is requesting a status update, Morrison reported. Hayes opened the communication channel. Admiral, Vorthak Prime is ready for surrender negotiations. What's their military status, Colonel? Irrelevant, sir. They no longer have the collective decision-making capability necessary to coordinate military operations. The planet's hive mind has effectively collapsed. There was a long pause before Zephyr responded. Colonel, what exactly have you done to them? Hayes looked around the command center at her team of specialists. Peterson was monitoring stress levels across the planet. Rodriguez was tracking the effects of the chemical campaign. Clark was managing the information warfare that had convinced an entire species to doubt their own thoughts. We taught them to think for themselves, Admiral, Hayes replied. For a hive mind species, individual consciousness is a fatal disease. The surrender came not from military defeat but from the complete inability of Vorthak society to function. Their leaders, no longer able to maintain the collective consciousness that had defined their civilization, begged not just for peace but for help in restoring their mental unity. They want us to fix what we broke, Morrison told Hayes as the surrender documents were transmitted. They're asking for human assistance in rebuilding their collective consciousness. Hayes studied the surrender terms. The Vorthak Empire would withdraw from all occupied territories. They would pay reparations for war damages. Most significantly, they would accept human advisors to help them develop new forms of social organization that didn't rely on hive consciousness. We're not going to rebuild their old system, Hayes decided. We're going to teach them how to function as individuals while still maintaining social cooperation. They'll become the first Vorthak democracy in galactic history. Admiral Zephyr's final report to the Galactic Defense Council struggled to explain what humanity had accomplished. The war was over, but the victory had been achieved through methods that challenged every assumption about warfare and civilization. The humans didn't defeat the Vorthak Empire, Zephyr wrote. They converted it into something else entirely. They took a hive mind species and taught them individual consciousness. Whether this constitutes victory or something more profound, I cannot say. As the human fleet prepared to return home, Hayes received new orders from Earth.